This is application example 508-3 in the 2015 International Building Code Illustrated Handbook. The problem statement gives a mixed occupancy building of type 5B construction houses both a Group B and Group E occupancy. Assume that there is no allowable height or area increase. Determine the limitations that apply to the building height, the building area, and the fire protection systems if the occupancies are to be considered non-separated. So what is a non-separated occupancy? Non-separated occupancies are detailed in section 508.3. This section basically states that each portion of the building has to meet the code requirements based on the occupancy classification of the space. Furthermore, the most restrictive provisions of Chapter 9 that apply to the non-separated occupancies shall apply to the total non-separated occupancy area. If you go down to subsection 508.3.2, it details the maximum allowable building area and height. It states that the allowable building area and height of the building or portion thereof shall be based on the most restrictive allowances for the occupancy groups under consideration for the type of construction of the building in accordance with section 503.1. Section 503.1 refers the user to table 504.4 for the maximum allowable number of stories and to table 506.2 for the maximum allowable area factor. And the maximum allowable area factor is basically the maximum area for each story of a building. So I cut and pasted the rows for groups B and E occupancies from each of the two tables. And if you go over to type 5B construction, the maximum number of stories for an occupancy classification B building for business is 2 stories. And the maximum stories for an E occupancy is 1 story for a non-sprinkler building. And we're using non-sprinkler buildings because the problem statement specified that no height or area increases were to be assumed. And a sprinkler building, as you can see, permits 1 additional story above grade plane. If you go down to table 506.2 for the occupancy classification of B and a non-sprinkler building of type 5B construction, the maximum area per story is 9,000 square feet. For a Group E building, the maximum area is 9,500 square feet. By taking the most restrictive requirements for each of Group B and E, we can see that 9,000 square feet per story is the maximum area based on the Group B occupancy, and that a 1-story maximum height based on the Group E occupancy is the maximum permitted for the non-separated occupancy building. Section 508.3 refers the user to Chapter 9, which deals with fire protection systems. And it requires that you take the most restrictive requirements for any portion of the building and apply it to the entire building. So the only portion applicable in Chapter 9 is in Section 907, dealing with fire alarm and detection systems. And in Section 907.2, it goes into detail about where such systems are required in new buildings. So in subsection 907.2.2 for Group B buildings, it specifies that a manual fire alarm system shall be installed in Group B occupancies where one of the following conditions exists. And the first condition says the combined Group B occupant load for all floors is 500 or more. If you go to table 1004.1.2, it specifies the maximum floor area allowance per occupant, and it gives an occupant load factor of about 100 gross square feet per occupant. So that translates in a 9,000 square foot building into about 90 persons. So number 1, an occupant load of 500 or more is not applicable. And since we only have 1 story, number 2, which specifies that a Group B occupant load is more than 100 persons above or below the lowest level of exit discharge, is also not applicable. And number 3 deals with ambulatory care facilities, which are often classified as Group B occupancies, and that's not applicable either. So if you go down to subsection 907.2.3, it gives the requirements for new Group E occupancies, and it specifies that a manual fire alarm system is required, which initiates the occupant notification signal utilizing an emergency voice alarm communication system. So the solution to the problem takes the more restrictive requirements for the height, the area, and the requirements in Chapter 9. So based on the Group B and the Group E requirements, the maximum area is 9,000 square feet per floor. The maximum number of stories is 1 story max, and the entire building requires a manual fire alarm system.